Good afternoon. These slides were actually designed by my 13-year-old son, so I was going to make them all grey and just really plain, and he's like, no, I'm going to make them look cool, so that's why they look the way they look. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for coming and attending. Thank you for attending my session, and thank you for being here at WordCamp Sydney. This is my second WordCamp ever, and this is my second time speaking at WordCamp, so it's a big thing for me to be up here. You rock. So just a quick intro. I am Robert Wilde. I'm a dad and then a developer. And yes, that's me in my onesie. I started it. I'm sorry, I should have turned up last night wearing mine, but I chickened out. Yes, I'm a dad and developer. I've been doing tech for 20 years. I started engineering back in the early 90s. I've been around everywhere, Camalco Aluminium, smelter control systems. I worked in the entertainment industry for a while. I was actually a DJ and an MC for a while. I worked at Microsoft, sysadmin, remote desktop, hypervisor, that sort of stuff. In the last 5 years, I've just been doing cloud. I still dabble in Office 365, Google Apps. I love Laravel, but I also love WordPress a lot too. PHP is my favorite language. I'm trying to get my head around Node.js and really want to do some stuff with Electron. That stuff is really cool. So I've got a little disclaimer for you today. Please take everything I'm about to talk about with a grain of salt. I don't know everything. This is just a way, or my way, not the way on how to do things. So hopefully I can teach you a few things, I'm hoping that today will generate some questions and we can discuss and give you some ideas to play with, and not everybody knows everything, and that's certainly me, that's for sure. What we will cover today is I will give you some ideas about the WordPress workflow and what it includes, why you should be using a workflow, and describe some tools and some really interesting things. Even if you're not a developer, it's still a handy thing to have and utilize. And yeah, some more tools to manage the workflow and just move data between each environment. So what is this WordPress workflow thing I discuss? It's made up of 3 environments. The development environment, commonly referred to as local. That's the environment on your machine. That's the one that you play with. Nobody else gets to touch. Then we have the staging environment. This is the in-between you and the client or the live site. This runs on a public server, but it's unique. Usually, I use a unique URL, or you can restrict access via password, that type of thing, but it's not something that anyone can generally find. And then, of course, you have the production environment, also known as the live environment. This is what everyone gets to play with, and this is your end result. Now, there's some key factors to the workflow type. We have 2 different sort of flows. One is just the new site when you go dev, stage, live. You build something, you put it on staging, you let the client play with it, then it goes to live. That's your sort of new site entry level. But there's also a kind of a refactor environment which you can play with a lot too when you're looking at somebody's current site and you need to move it from live to staging, possibly down to dev, do some work, back up to staging, then back over to live. You don't always have to come down to dev. Maybe you might be changing some plugins, testing some stuff, doing some updates, some patches. It's always a really good idea to move it off the live site when you're doing that sort of thing. So why do you need this kind of environment? Or why do you need to follow this kind of workflow? We've got a few reasons for you. To create an isolated sandbox. Like I said, when you want to test anything, you want to update stuff, it's really good to have an isolated area that you can make changes, you can break stuff, and you're not going to affect your clients or your clients' as they're visiting the site. They're not going to see the white screen of death or sorry, down for maintenance. None of that's going to happen. You can make changes. It gives you the ability to compare what you're working on with what exists. I have a terrible memory, And especially when you're doing stuff with the front end, UI, the user interface or the user experience, it's really, really beneficial to be able to compare changes that you make with the live site at the same time and be able to see the differential. Very handy. And you can do it during business hours. You do not want to play with a live site. You should never work on a live site. You should never update plugins, and you should never update or modify code. Now, I do say that, being ever so slightly hypocritical. Out of all the experienced devs in the room, who agrees with this? You should never play with a live site. Now, keep your hand up if you've broken this rule more than once. So it is what you should do, just not what you must do. Every once in a while, there's a need for it. Something might have broken. You have to fix it. You just have to be aware of the consequences. It's really important to know that if you're aware of it, you might stop before you do it and do the right thing. Migrate. So some ideas for a setup. When you're setting up your migration or your environment, one of the things to keep in mind is to try and mirror. Your live site is the primary thing. This is what we want to duplicate or clone, and we want to be as similar to that as humanly possible. So we want to have the same environment or stack, as it's referred to. A common one is LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. One that's pretty much taking over, which is, I think, a lot better, LAMP, which uses Nginx, which I know it's a funny acronym because it's actually engine, but it's an E, and that's the wonderful world of what we do. So we've got some tools for local environment. If you want to keep it simple, well, we've got the good old, WAMP, MAMP, XAMPP, and desktop server. I haven't played with it yet, but apparently it's pretty cool. It's very specifically directed at local environments for WordPress. It has some really cool migration tools involved in it for bringing stuff over for WordPress. Again, I haven't played with it much, but I'd like to. I'm more hardcore type of thing. If you want to go advanced tools, you've got things like Vagrant with VVV, or Chassis, which is actually made by this cool guy just down here. So if you want to learn about that, he can tell you all about it. Docker, which is another one that's really taking over. Building Docker and container. I haven't got my head around that stuff yet, but apparently it's becoming pretty huge and something to think about. And of course, just a simple Linux virtual machine, which is what I do with a really cool tool called Easy Engine, which I will show you shortly. So that's the local environment. And then when it comes to your staging environment, there's some things to look forward to there. Again, some really good dedicated WordPress hosting providers will give you a staging environment. It's like WP Engine has one where it's just a simple click. You go into the WP admin, click a button, everything's cloned across in one button, and then you've got somewhere to play, and then if you do it properly, you can move it back later on. There's some caveats there, but it does simplify the process somewhat. And I've played with a couple of dedicated providers like WP Engine, Pantheon. There's a really cool one in Brisbane called Connectix, which I'm going to be using very shortly. And of course, we've got the guys here from Flywheel who know all about this sort of stuff. So if you want to, talk about dedicated WordPress hosting, they're the guys to talk to. I haven't played with it much, but I did look at it last night, and it looks really nice. If you need other options, Amazon virtual machines, EC2 instances, I have several of those because I like to tinker, and they're very cost effective. I believe the micro instances are still free for the first year if you've never signed up before, so it's a nice place to play, build a Linux box. I always like to create custom domains for my staging. I know some people like to use like stage and then the domain name. I like to isolate it just a little bit more to make sure there's no mistakes. I created webdevstaging.net and then just put the client's name in front of that to make it really sort of difficult for regular people to find, but easy if you give the address. Keep your staging as close to the hosting config as possible. So like I said before, the LAMP stack and the LAMP stack, make sure you mirror that as closely as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but as close as you can is great. And also make sure it's in the same location. You don't want your hosting for the live site to be in the US and your staging to be somewhere else, and then when you're doing testing, one does something and this one that looks weird and one's fast and one's slow. Try and keep them as close as humanly possible, but don't use the same server. I've seen people use a shared host live and then staging on the same machine. If you have some really bad thing happen and for some reason your database freezes or something happens and you have to reboot the machine, you're going to have to reboot the live as well as the staging, and your client won't like that very much at all. So keep it isolated. Some tools that I love to use to move data around. I'm hoping most of you have all heard of MigrateDB Pro, which is really, really cool. It's one of my favorite tools. It not only migrates the database, but it also allows you to migrate the upload folder as well. It will back up the database before it migrates it. It will take care of all your URL transfers, so it'll change the domain names for you. It's really quick and really simple. Been using that for a long time. WP Core, which is a cool tool that I use, allows you to create collections of plugins, so you can just install one plugin and then it installs all the plugins you want really quickly. I'll show you that in operation shortly. Something for me that's always been really important, especially coming from a computer background, backup, backup, and backup. You can never have too many, ever. And I love Updraft Plus is one of my favorites. It's free. You can back up to multiple locations, stick it in Dropbox, stick it in S3. It has revisions, so you can have multiple backups of database and your files and contents like uploads and plugins, and then separate them, and then actually have database daily and content weekly, so you don't take up too much space. Really, really nice to play with. I like it. And Manage WP, which is really, really good for managing your WordPress sites, but it has built-in backup and cloning functionality, which I'll show you shortly, which works pretty good. If you're managing more than 2 or 3 sites, you need something like Manage WP to just easily migrate, and not just migrate, but just manage plugins and themes and security, and it makes things a lot simple. It's all about saving time, because time is money. If you don't know any of this information in relation to being able to have a staging environment with your current hosting provider, ask them and see if they have it inclusive. All the ones I've checked actually do, and a lot of them are introducing more quick and simple sort of one-button click build environments, and if they don't have that, they give you your own environment to play with, which is really handy. So we're going to try and run a demo. I recorded all these, so they shouldn't break. And famous last words, I guess. So this is one of my staging environments. I also run some stuff on Azure. I like to play a little bit everywhere, and I get it for free, so it makes me happy. Please play. There we go. Is it playing? Oh, stop it. There we go. Easy Engine's fantastic because it's single line installation. It's all tab completion, so you can just hit tab and it tells you what commands you have to enter into it. But it's really, really simple. As you can see there, to create a site, you just go EE site create, give it the domain name, and then tag it. This one's tagged with WP. If you want to do multi-site subdomain, WP subdomain, multi-site with subdirectory. If you want it to be WordPress with PHP 7, just put a tag on the end of it. You can do normal PHP sites, a MySQL site, a HTML site. You can build a HTML site and convert it to WordPress, like with a single line. And then that's the entire WordPress installation done. There's nothing else to do. It's configured the database, it's configured everything. It's really, really quick and simple. And then once you're done, you can do a site info, and then get all the information about where all the logs are stored, what's it running, database information. It's got really good logging built into it, so you can turn on logging with one command, track and trace. I use it so much because I build like Laravel stuff, and so you can build just standard PHP sites. It's a really, really simple tool to use. They've just added a single line configuration of Let's Encrypt, so you could just go WP -- Let's Encrypt, and woohoo, you've got SSL done, no problems. Really makes things simple. They've got a great community, good Slack channel. They've been around for a little while. I've been using them probably for a couple of years. It's one of my favorite tools. So next one. My other really cool tool that I've been using for a while is WP Core. So when you have a live site, and sometimes they have 20, 30, I've seen one recently with 50, 60 plugins, you don't want to have to FTP, don't have FTP please, SFTP, or try and transfer those plugins to the other site. It takes too long, and it's really annoying and irritating. And this tool allows you to create collections. So if you have a collection of plugins that you like to use when you're developing, you can create a dev collection. If you've got plugins that you like to use for e-commerce, create a collection there. Or if you already have a site, this is my blog, you can go into the current site, install WP Core, go into the plug. You can see there I've got like 30 plugins, a couple aren't active, I'm playing with them. Go into WP Core, and it's got a lovely little button on the side that'll tell you to either export or create collection with all plugins, or create collection with just active plugins. And then bam, you've got this awesome collection with all the plugins that you have in that website. Give it a really good name, so you can find it really easily. There's a free version. I signed up for it so long ago that they actually gave me the paid version for free, because I was like, they call it the grandpa account. I don't know why. It's nothing to do with my age or my hair. So I haven't actually paid for it, but I think it's like $7 a month, $50 a year, or you pay 99 bucks and you never have to pay ever again. It's for life. So this is a completely clean site, nothing installed. Just install WP Core. You grab the little key that it gives you, and you throw the key in, and it'll go away and just install 20, 30 plugins all for you all at the same time, which is a real cool time saver, I find. Nginx Helper is a plugin that's pre-installed with Easy Engine because it runs on Nginx, and helps you with caching and things like that. But I can't go on about this one enough. It's very helpful and very handy. It should only take about 2 minutes, and then all those plugins are installed. I don't think we have to wait until the end of that though. So the other one I was talking about was Manage WP. If you have a scenario where you need to create a staging environment, but you don't have a dedicated WordPress host that has it available, Manage WP makes things pretty simplistic. I haven't used it a lot because I use the tools that I use and I can get around it, but I have played with it from time to time just to see how well it works. I think a lot of people I know love Manage WP, but I think the only thing you have to be aware of that they just got recently purchased by GoDaddy, so their level of quality may change, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. So it's pretty simplistic. You've got, if you've never seen it before, you've just got a whole heap of dashboards for each website. Beyond the backup stuff, it's got really cool SEO, it's okay SEO, uptime monitoring, full cloning. The backups can be ported and isolated wherever you like, timed. Once you've created a backup of the primary site or the live site, you've got your new staging environment configured, completely clean installation of WordPress, nothing in it. You just add it to Manage WP. Once you've got it installed there, you go to your backups, click on clone, and then just select it from the list of URLs, and click the clone button, and in about 4 minutes, the entire site will be completely cloned over to another location, another server, another location. You don't have to do anything. It's very, very useful. I won't go right towards the end of that one because it takes a while. It's very, very helpful and very handy to utilize. There was a few other things I wanted to talk about, but unfortunately I didn't think I was going to have enough time. There's so many other different aspects when it comes to creating a workflow. I mean, you can do it like this way. I tried to keep it a little bit more simplistic. You can go more advanced, do things like continuous deployment with Git. I've actually just recently seen a new online tool, I think it's called Semaphore CI, which allows you to set up continuous deployments. So if you use Git, you can just do a Git commit and it'll automatically move files from staging to local to dev without you having to do anything, which is pretty handy. A lot of those tools are great, but they do take a little bit of background knowledge to set up and get configured and get working. But once they're running, they're pretty cool. I've played with another one recently called Flight Plan, which is a really cool NPM tool to do SSH and rsync of moving files, which is really quick. But again, you know, it's got to get your head around it and start configuring it. But once you've got it set up, I think like Easy Engine, once you've got your head around it and got it set up, it's pretty easy to understand. I'm going to be putting some information on my blog about some of the stuff that I talked about, some guides and stuff like that, setting up Easy Engine, setting up Linux if it's something you want to play with. I didn't find it very difficult to learn. When I started, it was just PHP, MySQL, and HTML, you know, 15 years ago, and it's expanded quite extensively since then, and it's very difficult to pick up all this new stuff on a regular basis. So I'm posting a lot more information about it as I go. You can find me at mrwilde.com or Mr. Wilde on Twitter, or guess where? Mr. Wilde on Skype. I got those domains really early. Or I'm on the WP Australia Slack channel as Rob Wilde. If you have any questions about that sort of stuff, you can hit me up there. I'm pretty much always online. I live there. And finally, I just needed to thank that dude.
Awesome. So we have an extra 5 minutes of question time. So I hope there's a lot of questions.
On the spot.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Was awesome.
Thanks.
Your opinion, what you mentioned about cloning the production database. What's the best way, or what's your way to clone production database and keep non-prod database in sync with prod?
Keeping it in sync. Extremely.
Do you do it? You mentioned Migrate DB Pro.
Migrate
Is
DB
there a
Pro
solution for this?
So it's a migration tool that overwrites the current database. You can be very selective in tables. So, you know, if you're playing with the user table or content table or specific table, you can just, I never do it because I find it really difficult to pick out which one's which sometimes. But you can be very selective with the tables. The guys at Delicious Brains, God, I love that name. They're creating a new plugin, which they call MergeBot, which will actually do synchronization. So you'll actually be able to play with the live site, bring it over to staging, play with it over here, and actually merge the two together when you migrate it back. Unfortunately, Brad Tanara, who built Migrate DB Pro, he's not very good at telling people when things are going to be ready. He just says, I'm working on it and it'll be soon. But they've been working on it for about a year. As you're probably aware, that's a pretty complex thing to do. And it'll actually utilize a secondary service that will look at the data and merge it together really well. But generally, no, I haven't found a really good way to take care of the database problem, generally speaking.
Who was next? Okay. Hi. So going back to the four things: don't work live, don't update plugins live, and things. Do you, in this scenario, do you think that auto update in WordPress it's a wrong option to have for normal clients, knowing that if you do activate auto update, it might break your site and you don't know it because maybe that can happen sometimes. So in my case, I always deactivate that option in my config files. But why WordPress take the risk to auto, or even hosting companies take the risk to auto update your stuff without you knowing when it happens and how it happens? I think it's a wrong user experience thing to give to the user because they break things without you knowing. Thank you.
That's right. I'm somewhat of a control freak, so every site that I build for a client, I don't let them have access to the plugins. They get editor access, and that's about it. They can't see plugins or anything like that. I don't mind the fact that the minor versions of WordPress update themselves. In between major isn't too bad. I don't think anything is going to break there, considering what they're changing. I certainly wouldn't want to see plugins update themselves. That would be very scary, because you just don't know. Most of them are written really well. Some of them aren't written really well. But again, I think that falls back to making sure that you pick good plugins. I do a lot of cleaning up of old sites and pulling out old plugins, and people have a tendency to try this and then try that and try this, and then you'll see a site that's got like 4 different versions of form and 3 different versions of this, and from different suppliers and providers, and some of them are all still turned on. And so I think if you do follow those principles of a good reputable plugin developer, someone who's got a lot of downloads, someone who's updated the plugin recently, the plugin is being maintained pretty well, even on the wp.org free stuff, you can be pretty safe that nothing's going to go wrong. But I'd never let it auto update, that's for sure.
Any other questions?
That's great talk, Rob. With that WP core, that I wish that you told me that like yesterday or the day before, because I was doing something along those lines. Do you know if it handles premium plugins?
Oh, I missed that part. Sorry. So, if you sign up for the paid version, it actually allows you to create so for premium, when you do you go in and look at the site, it will actually grab all the plugins that are in the wp.org. But when you create the collection, you can edit the collection, you can actually add in a location with your own plugins and customized ones. So if you had I've always got a storage of all the latest of my premium stuff, my developer stuff, it will look in there and just pull that out. So you can add it and create those collections that way. I actually started playing with Joe Hoyle from Human Made actually made this really cool S3 connector for WordPress that I'm using to help with that problem, so I can have a central site with all my developer stuff in it, all the premium plugins, and they can be updated, and when they're updated, it'll create a copy over on S3 that my collections can use for installation, so I don't have to go looking for them all the time or worry about updates. WP Core sends you an email for each collection on a regular basis saying, oh, this collection's got a couple of plugins that have just been updated, or these ones are over. It really gives you a lot of really cool info, makes it easy to move things around.
Sweet, that sounds awesome. Cheers.
Any other questions? Down there.
Cool.
Hey, I'm new to WordPress, so the question may not really make sense, but I want to use WordPress in a totally automated scenario, like a perfect CI. And what I've found so far in my research and discussions that I've had with friends, I just want you to confirm that if that's right. So you could use, you could automate all the process before you go live. You could have dev environments and send them to a stage and send them to live. But when the website is live and data is going there, then you can't really do that. If you change any configuration on your local, then you can't just push it through Git and deploy it to the website. You have to log in to the live site as well. Is that right? Yes, I understand what you're saying. So basically, if you're doing some work, so every time I go to do some work on a live site, it'll always move back to staging and then down to production. From time to time, I will go from live to dev. I don't like to, because if I have that set up, I have a tendency to accidentally push stuff from dev straight to live, and that's really bad and it takes up a lot of my time. But predominantly when I'm doing that sort of work and you're coming back down to dev, you're really only doing, for me anyway, I'm doing back-end stuff, updating some plugins, some themes and stuff like that. So that doesn't affect the database. So migrating that back into WordPress isn't going to cause any problems. It's only when you migrate over and you start changing content, then you're going to have a bit of an issue. And usually, yeah. So usually when it comes to the plugin side of things, I always usually do that in the evenings, and I'll have a tendency to move things over to the staging to do testing. Like we said before, we don't always do it that way, but most of the time I try and do it that way. If everything looks great and there's no failures, I'll use something like Manage WP to complete the updates
on the live site that way. There are a couple of plugins that are coming out. They're trying to get around that and integrate a migration process with database, but it's still really difficult to do. You just got to find the one that feels good and that you're happy with.
Yeah, I've just got another question about WP Core. Does it also take across any settings in the plugins, or is it just the plugin files?
Just the plugin files, so it's just the install.
Two questions. One's a simple yes. Is WP Connector available now?
WP Connector.
Yeah, you're talking about the connector or the connect before. Don't worry, we'll bypass
That's
it.
right.
You've got a production site that has a lot of Google traction. How do you deal with duplicate content on a staging site?
Well, that's the primary reason why I use a very unique URL. I don't like to use subdomains for that reason. I'm not an SEO expert by any sense of the word, but I do see that happen from time to time. So I use a very specific webdevstaging.net, and every time I create a new domain, it's like for mine it'd be mrwilde.webdevstaging.net, and it sort of fixes that problem because it's not that domain yet. And when it migrates to live, then it picks up the proper URL.
So you don't turn robots or anything like that off on, which means you're altering the site?
Not by default, no. I haven't found a problem with it yet.
One